The Norton Anthology of African American Literature is the most comprehensive attempt ever to collect the best and most historically significant work by African American writers from colonial times through Toni Morrison. 120 writers are represented here, some whose names we'll never know, and all sorts of genres, the plays, fiction, and poems one would expect to find in a course book, but also folk tales and songs and sermons. Joining me now, the general editors of the new anthology, Henry Louis Gates, Jr. He's chairman of the African American Studies Department at Harvard University and a contributor to the New Yorker magazine. Also here, Nellie McKay of the University of Wisconsin, and one of the writers whose work appears here, Jamaica Kincaid, who's also been on this broadcast before. First of all, congratulations. This is something special.
Thanks, Joe.
It really is something special. What's the significance of it, Nellie? Why is it so special to so many people that we now have this book on the bookshelves and in the homes and in the libraries?
I think it's special because no one, including the people who helped to put it together, really understood the nature of this tradition until this book was done. I think it's very special because what we have wrought, as we'll use a nice word there, what we have brought about in this book is having for the first time all of the richness and all of the treasures of the African American expressive culture in one place, which could not have been imagined until the book was done.
What does it say in terms of, with respect, this body of work, this place, this book, what does it say there about the black experience and black writers and artists?
Well, it says that the quest for freedom, in which black people have been engaged since 5 minutes after they got off the boat in 1619 in Virginia, has been coterminous.
Which is in here.
Yeah.
Yes.
But is coterminous with the quest for literacy. And it's ironic that this was published when in the midst of the debate over Ebonics, so-called, which a name I think is very ugly, but I happen to like black English vernacular debate, because it shows that black people embraced the King's English since the 17th and 18th centuries. And as I tell my students, the King's English for us is Dr. King's English. And this is the tradition of it. 2,600 pages of people fighting to take control of a language in which they were represented as absences, as ugly, as negations, blackness being everything that cultivated, civilized Europe and America was not. And we stepped inside that language and made it our own. We appropriated it, and we used the master's tools to attempt to dismantle the master's house. And that house was racism, slavery, and segregation.
All right.
I'd like to add to that what was just said, that they appropriated it even as it was being withheld from them.
Meaning, how did they do that?
Even as literacy was being withheld from the slaves, they managed to appropriate it for their own purposes and, in fact, to declare themselves human beings.
Before I get in further along on this, I want to talk about all these things, even Ebonics. The notion is, what do we have here? We have 7 periods: vernacular, slavery and freedom, the literature of Reconstruction to the Negro Renaissance, 1865 to 1919. We have Harlem Renaissance, 1919 to 1940. Realism, naturalism, modernism, 1940 to 1960. Black arts movement, 60 to 70. Literature since 1970. How do you do this? What's the process? And I mean, you're in here.
Yes.
How do you do this? How do you decide who goes in and who doesn't, and who's not included? Because a lot of the people who are most prominent and best known are living. And so you got to say to some, you're in and you're out, and you're not in. And what does that do? Because it's a rejection of somehow belonging in a place that is so significant.
Well, it's a very young tradition. And so, curiously enough, many of our most accomplished writers are still alive. People like Jamaica Kincaid, people like Alice Walker, people like Toni Morrison, August Wilson. You start with the idea, and then you have to persuade somebody to publish the idea. That's how you get started.
Right.
And that took long enough. And then if you're...
Why did that take long enough?
Well, I got the idea in 1980.
It's not the first Norton Anthology.
No, but it's the first black Norton Anthology.
I know.
And though there have been black anthologies since 1845, when Les Sennel was published in New Orleans in French. I mean, there are hundreds of black anthologies. never been a black Norton, none this comprehensive, so that even the very best ones were very limited in their scope by comparison. You have to remember what the market was like in 1985. No one was sure at Norton or anywhere else if we could sustain the sales, if they could justify the investment. So it took 2 years to persuade him to do that. We did marketing studies. We had to figure out if we would sell 12,000 copies total, which we sold 30,000 copies in 2 weeks. So it's laughable now, but it wasn't then. And it was very intense discussions, and it took a lot of patience, and I had a lot of encouragement from people at Norton and my great colleague at Cornell, M.H. Abrams, who's the godfather of Norton Anthologies. And then I turned to Nellie McKay and 9 other people and asked them if they would participate in this venture jointly. I thought it was a good thing to share, because effectively we were establishing the canon, for good or ill, of African American literature.
I mean, this is the mothership. Meaning what?
The canon meaning the best, the most sophisticated, the indispensable.
This is the standard.
The standard.
That's the standard.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What does it mean to you to be included?
Well, I was quite surprised, since my voice is immigrant. I'm an immigrant American African, and I don't know if that's my role in it, because there are a number of African immigrants who have written in this country. So I assume that that's part of what I am, and also perhaps part of the generation of women who seem to have written more in this period than before. I'm deeply honored and touched. I was amazed to be in it, and I have to say that if I had not been in it, I wouldn't have I wouldn't have minded at all, because it's
because the company is so great.
The company is very great, and to have been excluded from it wouldn't have. I would have hoped next time. I mean, I assume there'll be more. And,
let me just start about the first. Talk to me about the slavery period and the vernacular and what we're talking about there. When you had, how did you find and where is the?
Well, this material has existed, and most of us who teach this material know about this material, and some of it has been collected in other anthologies as well, and some of it are in archives. So there really wasn't any great discoveries in doing this. We knew the material, we knew where the material was, and it just meant going and putting it together in this book. As I said, some of it has already been in other anthologies.
And we had a brilliant vernacular editor, Robert O'Mealy, who's a professor of English.
That was the part of it, is that his sifting and winnowing, so to speak.
Can you argue that slavery was a birth of a literary tradition?
No, sure.
It was.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it was born out of slavery.
Yes.
And it was the Anglo-African tradition. Phyllis Wheatley was the first person of African descent to publish a book of poetry in English.
Yeah.
There was a black man who lived in the 16th century called El Negro Juan Latino, and he published 3 books of poetry in Latin between 1573 and 1586. But the first person to publish a book of poetry or imaginative literature in English was Phyllis Wheatley, which was published in London, September 1st, 1773.
And don't forget that Wheatley wrote like an 18th century British poet.
Yeah. Now, some might argue, and have, that I don't want to be called a black writer.
Yes.
And I don't want to be an anthology of black writers. What I want to do is be in an anthology of American writers.
Yeah, we put them in first.
Yes.
Well,
with a great hit note. Did not want to be here.
it's true, though.
It's true.
You know?
Yes.
It's true.
And they've got a point.
If the category was delimiting, or could be delimiting in any way, then I would understand it. But I think Toni Morrison has been so eloquent about this. This is a long debate in black letters, right? Am I a poet or a Negro poet? This is the debate between Langston Hughes on the one hand and County Cullen on the other, and it's played itself out before and played itself out since, and it will continue. In fact, Albert Murray said after the Modern Language Association event that we had in December that he was, mixed feelings about being here. He said, I'm an American writer, but he's also in the American tradition as well as the African American tradition, and that's one of the points that we tried to make. We're not trying to be exclusive, to take anyone out of the American tradition, or to take Jamaica Kincaid out of West Indian tradition, or the English tradition.
But the fact is, I I belong in all.
You belong in all.
Yes, and
That's right.
Can you also make the argument that this book, you needed this book to somehow legitimize or credentialize, if that's a word?
The tradition.
Yes.
The tradition.
Yes.
This says this is intellectual work
Absolutely.
of the highest order.
Right.
And one could also add to that the reception of the book proves that we were right.
And why does it prove the reception? Prove that you're right?
Because long before the first anthology this anthology was sold to a student, 30,000 copies had been sold to people who have no business to buy it, other than that they saw it and thought it was valuable and worthwhile.
Right. And canonized, in a sense. Can you say that this is the most exciting time
Without a doubt.
in black literature?
Oh, absolutely.
Without a doubt.
Because there's so many people writing and being received well?
That's right.
So many people writing well.
Writing well.
Right.
Writing well, period.
We have more.
Yes.
I mean, you have to remember. I mean, we forget this when we're talking about the progress of African Americans since 1865. We were slaves until 1865, and then neo-slaves before the law in most places until 1965. Remember the Civil Rights Act is 1964, and the
Brown
Voting
versus
Rights
Boyd
Act
wasn't until 54.
54, and the Voting
Right.
Rights Act is 65. And people like us Nellie went to Harvard, I went to Yale because of, in the late 60s and early 70s, because of affirmative action that opened up the great historical research institutions to us for the very first time. And now we're professors at those very places. And someone like Toni Morrison gets a Nobel Prize, graduated from Howard, went to Cornell, and is a professor at Princeton. I mean, we're all, Jamaica teaches at Harvard, thank goodness.
But why do we need an African American studies program?
Well, we're both chairs of African
I
American
understand
Studies.
that's why I'm asking. So,
Because there needs to be a place where the African American experience, not just in a single area, but in many areas, music and art and history and literature, can in fact be seen and studied, perceived as a whole, where people can get an in-depth education.
and you need a department to do that.
Well, you can't do it anywhere else.
Okay. Music is in here also. There are folk tales here, there are rhymes and songs, ballads and work songs. Now, why is that included in a body about literature?
Well, all literature has an oral base. All literature has a vernacular base. We just forget it. In fact, this is a clear case of the margins influencing the center, because I think that all anthologies now at Norton and elsewhere will have a CD published with them. And at the time when we proposed it, it was a radical idea. And we started this project so long ago that it was supposed to be a cassette.
It was also supposed to be finished by 1990.
It was.
That's right.
It was. But it wasn't. Maybe it was worth the wait.
Yeah. Is there a period that you like best here?
Her period.
Actually, no.
Is there an author you like best here?
All of them.
Yeah.
But I like the. In fact, I plan to read the spirituals. I think one thing that I'm sure hasn't escaped anybody involved in it at all is that the origins or the model for this has a precedent in the inspiration from the beginning that the American slaves, African people took. The inspiration, of course, was the Bible, and that too is the beginning of a literature of a people.
And
Absolutely.
began with an oral base.
And yes.
You got rap in here?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. We had a fight over that.
What was it?
I think Nellie should explain.
You were for or again, Nellie?
I was again, and I've been trying to explain that ever since the book came out, because it's become public knowledge that I was again.
Yeah.
But I don't like rap, and I was about to censor it out of my anthology, but he wouldn't let me. He argued and convinced me that as part of the expressive culture,
Yeah.
it needed to be included.
What did he say that convinced you?
Oh, he just said it in that tone of voice that suggested that he was stronger than I am.
No.
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 But you had, go ahead.
Well, it founded on historical principles, meaning we're showing how the culture evolved through time.
Right.
It's not a static culture, and there's rap we might not like it. Look, I hate disco. You know, I thought the culture needed to be psychoanalyzed when disco was prevalent. I was glad when it disappeared. And maybe
Some people might have felt the same way about jazz.
Oh, there was a lot of feelings against jazz.
and particularly by literary scholars in the
literary
20s.
scholars in the
Oh,
early days.
Yeah.
The New Negro Anthology is the most
Yes.
famous anthology edited by Alain Locke.
Yeah.
They had one essay in this 446-page anthology, and it was a total on jazz, and it by Joel A. Rogers, and it was a total trashing of jazz.
Yeah.
He basically called it jungle music and said it was lowering the standards of civilization possessed by the Negro. And that the sooner we got out of this jazz period, the better. It's like they missed the whole boat. They also didn't write about Marcus Garvey and mass
That's
movements
true.
like that, which is
Yeah.
another mistake. But
Well-
Jamaica, it falls into a category, as I think about it, of a lot of West Indian writers who came to the States
right.
and launched their writing
That's
career
right.
or continued their writing, like
That's
Claude
right.
McKay,
That's right.
just to pick one.
I mean, listen to some of the people in here. Alice Walker's here.
sure.
John Edgar Wideman's here. Walter Mosley's here. Mr.
Oh, we love him.
Well, so do I, but I'm just letting America know who's in here. Rita Dove,
Yeah.
poet
Laureate.
Poet laureate, yeah.
This is the welcome table of African American culture, that anthology.
It's the what?
The welcome table. It's a metaphor from
Yeah.
the black tradition, from the spirituals.
You can,
Yeah, we're all
in
gonna
other words, you read. Let's assume you're not going to do this over a day. This is not to be done overnight. You come away with what? It's a walk through the cultural legacy of the African American experience as seen through its most talented observers.
120
I couldn't
eyes.
say it better.
The thing about the African American experience that is always kind of interesting to me is that it is the American experience. I mean, you can hardly imagine Thomas Jefferson or any of those people speaking so eloquently about freedom if they were not surrounded by people who were not free. And the other thing about it, you realize when you look at something like that, is that if the American social hierarchy was arranged along date of arrival, that the very top of American society would be either deeply integrated or predominantly black. And you sort of realize that when you see something like this, how deeply American, how deeply African the American experience is, because it only evolves in opposition to these people.
And what an act of faith and or hubris to be a slave or an ex-slave and then to accept the principles of individual liberty and collective democracy and then master this language, which are forbidden by law after 1740. South Carolina
Yes.
legislature passed a statute making it illegal for slaves to learn to read and write. And that quickly spread by custom, if not, in fact, by law. So you're forbidden, as Nellie was saying earlier, even from learning the ABC. So you had to, Frederick Douglass called it stealing a little learning. You had to steal it. You had to trick them out of the learning. And then turn it against them to declare your freedom, to demand that the system live up to its principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. That's a beautiful story.
Yeah, go ahead, Nellie.
I was about to say, it also seems to me that that's an element that has remained within the entire African American culture. I was reminded of this recently listening to Marian Anderson's performance
Constitutional.
that she didn't do in Constitutional
Didn't do it.
Hall.
That's right. The one that she didn't. So she went over to
But
the
that
White Lincoln Monument. wasn't it?
Yes, she went to the Lincoln Monument, and she began the concert with singing "My Country, 'Tis of Thee." Now that just really is incredible. That in fact she grasps the freedom that she should have had, and simply throws it out there for the whole world, in spite of her having been denied Constitution Hall. She can still sing with great power, "My country, 'tis of thee, great land of liberty."
Let me just finally do two things that are not part of this. One, I ask you, you were in attendance at this great debate between August Wilson and Robert Rothstein, moderated by Anna DeVere Smith. It was supposed to take the subject of whether there needed to be a separate black theater for black theater experience, because somehow, in August's view, he made a famous lecture about this, it was not being maximized by the existing theatrical venues. They had this great debate. It was supposed to be one of the great cultural debates of our time. It turned out not to be so. But where do you come down on this issue suggested by August Wilson?
Well, the idea that we need black theaters, Asian theaters.
He wrote about it in New Yorker, too.
Yeah, I did. Yiddish theaters, lesbian theaters, feminist theaters, whatever. I mean, I like that. I mean, the more theaters, the merrier. But the part of August's argument that I thought was severely wrong-headed, frankly, was his strident rejection of colorblind casting. And in the middle of the debate, he said that women shouldn't even play men. I mean, this is 5 feet from Anna Devere Smith, who is embodies, as I said,
in her performances.
In her performances, colorblind and genderblind casting. I think that we've moved too far along as a society for that. And I interviewed Baraka for the piece. He said, if O.J. Simpson can play a black man, Othello can play Laurence Olivier can play Othello.
Is that what he said?
That's what he said. That cracked me up.
What do you think? Same thing?
Oh,
or
I
you
agree with him.
Okay.
I certainly
How about
agree with him.
eubonics? What do you think of eubonics and the debate about that? Which seems to have gone away, but...
Well, I think a lot of people miss the whole point of what they should be talking about, in the sense that Black English is certainly its own language, and it's a legitimate language, and it is there, and it is going to be there, and children are going to use it, and grown-ups are going to use it. The difficulties come when we're talking about the marketplace.
Right.
And the need for children to learn, black children, to learn standard English for the marketplace. Not that they should stop learning how to use black English, but that the emphasis has to be placed on learning standard English. And I don't think that it can be done the way it came out at the very beginning.
What do you think, Jamaica?
Oh, well, I grew up speaking a version of Black English, though I wasn't allowed to speak it in front of my parents or adults. They made me speak the King's English, or was it the Queen English. I consider all of these things, Ebonics, or however you pronounce it, the O.J. Simpson trial, the Million Man March, I consider all these things American diversions. We've been reading the journals of Lewis and Clark, and one of them, I think it's Lewis, has a servant, he's really a slave, named York, on their trek out west. And every time they run into a funny situation with the native people, they drag York out, and York does all sorts of funny things, minstrelly things, and it's very diverting. And I think that that's the beginning of the American the African role in American life. Whenever things get dicey, American black people are brought out to, you know, Ebonics or march or say something. I think it's a diversion.
Brought out for what?
Entertainment and diversion. It diverts America. This question of language and Ebonics diverts America from facing the fact that the schools are ridiculous, that the schools are bad. Mm-hmm. It's not a question of standard English or Ebonics. It's just a question of these are not good schools.
Expensive
we don't
problems.
spend. They're expensive problems, but instead of talking about them, we talk about Ebonics.
Cheap fix.
Yes.
Right.
Well, so that's what I would say about it.
The Norton Anthology, African American Literature, Henry Louis Gates Jr. and Nellie Y. McKay. General editors included in here on page 2556 is Jamaica Kincaid. Lots of other. This is essential. A classic of splendid proportions, says Cornel West. Imagine my surprise.
It's a great book.
It's a great book, says Nellie McKay.
It is a great book.
It's a great book. There's also I don't want to make fun of this because it sounds like we're just selling something, but this is also a companion, an audio companion that goes with it, which you play for your class 10 minutes before
I start the
you
lecture.
enter the lecture room.
Yeah, I'm using it this semester to teach the tradition.
Yeah.
And it's exciting. In fact, our editor, Julie Reedhead, who saw our project through, just told me that it sold 4,000 copies this semester, and it only came out in December, in the student or the college edition.
Thank you all. Pleasure. to
Thank
have
you,
you on the
Charles.
broadcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. We'll have an interview recorded a couple of weeks ago with guess who? Henry Louis Gates Jr. Stay with us.